All right, we are now officially recording. So, welcome everyone. We have some participants kind of getting connected here. This is your Garden in the Panhandle live. This is our March episode, and we are talking palm trees today. So, I hope you all are excited. We have some of our panelists here. They're getting into the right mood here. They got palms in the background. My name is Mark Tanzig. I'm the Horticulture Extension Agent in Leon County. I will be your MC for today's Gardening in the Panhandle. We have a great group of panelists here. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. We'll go from east to west. We'll go Ray, Sheila, and Beth.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a great afternoon. Great to be here. My name's Ray Baudry. I'm the County Extension Director over in Gulf County and the Ag and Natural Resource Agent. I'm also a Sea Grant agent here, and I play horticulture agent on television sometimes.
And Master Gardener volunteer also, right?
That's
Court.
right. I do. I have 16 Master Gardeners at the moment. So
All
yeah.
right.
Sheila Dunning, Okaloosa County. I'm the commercial horticulture agent here for the last 22 years. Ooh. But my commercial audience are exclusively the green industry. So landscapers, municipal, property management, pest control, those sort of folks. I don't deal a lot with any of the vegetables, but of course I have to respond to homeowners also.
All right, and then I'm over here, Beth Bowles in Pensacola. Glad to be here today for our session on palms.
All right. So, palm trees, everyone, it's classic Florida, right? Can't be a Floridian without having a palm tree in the yard. Now, I want to talk to Sheila first, though, because what is maybe some of the folks in the audience can put in the chat, what is our state tree? Well, does anyone know what our state tree is? I'll give you guys a little time. I'm going to let Sheila tell us why some arborists, especially, there we go, Melissa Davis got it, the cabbage palm or palmetto palm, sable palmetto. It's a palm tree, right? Our state tree is a palm. Sheila, tell us why that drives arborists kind of crazy.
Well, in order to qualify to be a tree, one, you have to be a dicot and have the right vascular tissue that enables you to lay down bark. And you have additional buds that will remain dormant and expand out along branches. Well, a palm tree does not have a cambium layer, the growth layer underneath that bark that enables it to be able to expand. And therefore, what's covering a palm tree is not even bark. We
Oh
call
my
it
Lord.
pseudo bark. It is basically the leftover stem support, the boots that you see on the palm fronds. The only growing point, the only new leaf development that comes from a palm is the leaf spear at the very, very top. You do not see any lateral branches. You will not get supplemental buds coming out along the stem. So unfortunately, our recognized state tree is really a grass. A
Go Florida.
monocot, like a corn stalk.
Well, a lot of these decisions are made at the Capitol over where I'm from in Tallahassee, and those, maybe they're not arborists, Sheila. So we got to cut them a little bit of slack with trees and with a whole lot of other things, I suppose. But we are talking palms today, and again, a very classic Florida topic. And I am going to be asking our panelists some questions that have been, submitted by you out there, and they're going to answer them here live on Garden Panhandle Live. And I'm going to start off with kind of going over what are palms that we can grow in North Florida, because the Ray and Sheila, they have their coconut palms kind of, on the beach in the background behind them. But that's down south, right? That's a tropical thing. We're up in North Florida, we're a different growing zone, so it can be a little tricky. So I'm actually first going to start off with you, Ray, and ask, what are some of the cold hardy palms that we can grow here in Northwest Florida?
Well, I'll run down a list real quick, and cabbage palm is definitely one. Not a coconut palm, unfortunately. I've tried that before when I lived over on the Georgia coast, And knowing that that wasn't going to happen, but I just had this fantasy, this dream of having coconut palms. And yeah, that didn't work out so well. But hey, sometimes you just have to experiment, right? Uh, Cabbage palm, definitely, a pendo palm. There are bamboo palms. You guys are probably familiar with European palms. A number of the date palms also would grow well here. Native needle palm, a little bit shorter palm, is nice and does well here. And there's also Windmill and Washington that do well here as well. It's a shorter list than what you would find in Central or South Florida. Of course, our palmettos. Of course, I'm sure everybody's used to seeing palmettos, the green and the silver saws that you see in the area. Now, I'll say it's a little bit outside of their comfort zone, if I can use that term, but Chinese palm, fan palms, and queen palms will also grow here. If they're in an area where you can kind of get a good wind block, if they're at a certain spot on your property where they've got a little bit of a block, they're shielded by cold temperatures. They will grow, and I have an experiment with those on my property. And I love queen palms. They're probably my favorite palm. But I also wanted to share a really great reference, or resource, I should say. And this is my go-to. And this is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Guide to Plant Selection and Landscape Design. If you don't have this, you got to get it. I use this often for a number of issues that I may run across, or just things I want to think about changing in my landscape myself. I use it a lot, to say the least. You can find it in PDF. It's free to download from our Florida Friendly Landscaping website. There's also an app version on it if you're big into using apps on your iPhone or your Android. Or if you're like me and you like the hard copy, because I like to make notes. And as you can see, I have some little tabs there keeping up with things that I like in the guide. You can visit your local county extension office. They may have this on site for you. Or they may have to order you a copy, but I highly recommend this. It has the basic concepts in the front about landscaping, has some really nice design layout examples, and a great plant selector in the back half of the guide. It's full of color photos. I am a very visual person, so this works really well for me. And the plant selector goes from trees all the way down to grasses. And yes, there is a palm/palm-like section in the book from page 88 to 92. And many of the palms that I referenced earlier are in this guide. So please check that out.
Yeah, and for folks that are listening, we put the references as links in the chat. So if you open up your chat screen, the amazing folks in the background that you don't see their face right now, they're behind and putting these references up there so that you can easily get to them. And that is a great reference, Ray. Ray mentioned something. I'm going to take a little break, y'all, because Ray mentioned that there's the native needle palm. So some folks, I don't know about y'all, but in Tallahassee, every now and again, they'll plant some palm trees, cabbage palms, our state tree, and you'll hear comments about they're just trying to bring South Florida to North Florida, and that ain't North Florida. So, what are some of our native palms that are naturally here and would be, you know, they do belong here, right? If you saw them, they would be right at home. You guys want to? Ray mentioned needle palm. What else we got?
You asking
Saw
anybody?
palmetto.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah,
one. Saw palmetto is a good one.
Yep, we have little blue stem, right? There's another little sabal, the cabbage palm relative. There's a little blue stem palm. So we do have native palms in our area, and they do belong here. So it's not just we're bringing South Florida up here. It's just these palms are pretty great little plants sometimes. All right, so Beth, specifically for you, you're over there in Pensacola. You might get a little colder than the rest of us. Are there any tried and true cold hardy palms that you would recommend for the Pensacola area?
Yeah, so Ray mentioned quite a few of our cold hardy palms. Now, what we've seen in the past years, we've had quite a few freezes. You can grow any palm you want in North Florida. It's not necessarily going to live. Uh, So that's the key. We kind of go through these spells of warm winters and we try to extend the boundaries a little bit. But what we've really seen is we do get some damage when we go through a hard freeze on our Phoenix species. Those are going to have some cold damage to them. We definitely have some cold damage and some death on the queen palm, even with some protection. Every few years, that one's going to die. We have cold damage on Washingtonias as well. You know, that bud's really high in the air. It's going to freeze many times when we go through those hard freezes. People try to extend with a pygmy date palm. That's not going to make it very well. You'll be lucky if that makes it a couple of years, unless you're really, really protected. So stick with those Pendo, saw palmetto, cabbage palm, windmill palm. Those are the most true cold hardy. Another one to think about that people are starting to plant, it's a little pricier, is the mule palm. That is a cross between the Pendo and the queen. Little different look, not quite as feathery as the queen, but it's going to have a little more cold hardiness than the queen itself. So damage under a hard freeze, but usually you'll get regrowth that returns.
All right, thank you, Beth. And sometimes at Extension, we got to give you the facts, no matter if you like them or not. And Beth, you heard it here. You can grow any palm you want in North Florida, just many of them won't live. So let's see, I'm going to go to, let's see, Ray talked about this. Beth, one more for you. I want to ask you if you had to pick a palm tree for a small yard, what would be your ideal palm?
And this is hard because when we think of a yard, it's not just the palm that we see above ground. There are roots underground as well, and these don't just stay right where the palm trunk is. Like other plants, they extend farther out. So if you don't have room for the roots to really grow out well, it's going to be a little higher maintenance for you to manage that palm. It can be done, but it's a little more work. So think about the smaller type palms. You mentioned the needle palm if you have a little part shade, if you don't mind the spines and have kind of that wooded under canopy area. You could go with a sable minor. It's still going to get a little bit wider. You could get 6 to 10 feet wide. So it's not just the height, it's the width too on these palms. If you have a little room for some spread, you could do the saw palmetto. Well, that's going to creep slowly over time. But maybe a windmill palm, it gets tall, but it's not going to spread out too much. And despite its name, windmill palms don't do well in windy conditions. Those fronds really get torn up. So if it's a windy spot, I would not use a windmill palm, but a good one for a small space.
All right, thank you, Beth. All right, Sheila, coming to you and getting into some of the selection and planting. So we just talked about, which would be some of the best palms to select for our area, even for those small spaces. And now, kind of looking at what do we need to think about when we're planting. So Sheila, give us the rundown on the best methods of getting a palm planted in the ground so that we give it the best chance for survival.
Well, if you can begin with something smaller, you've got some patience, then containerized is still a viable option for you. But you're probably not going to get anything more than about a 6-foot tall palm, even into a large 30-gallon container. So unfortunately, a lot of folks say, nope, don't have that kind of time. I need it to already be 8, 10, 12 feet high.
They want to put the hammock on it right away.
Yeah, okay. You're going to wait at least a year for that, okay? But it's only a year. It's not a decade, right? So most of the time, they're going to have to order through somebody who brokers palms, whether it's your landscaper or an independent nursery, and they will be bringing them either from a palm farm or harvested from the wild in a bare root form. So what you will see is a fairly small root ball. The growth of roots from a palm does not occur from existing roots. It comes from a root initiation zone on the stem. So there is no great advantage to saving a lot of roots. So the harvesting folks do exactly that. They only leave a foot or so around that trunk, and they will dig it up and bring it to you. They will also tie up and probably remove more than half of the fronds, doing their best to protect that leaf spear. That's the critical point. That leaf that's just trying to come out cannot get broken. So when your palm arrives, what you see is not much root and not very many leaves, and that's a little scary for folks. But it is the best way for those to be transported. If they left all the leaves on, the wind whipping is going to potentially break the bud. It is also steadily losing water. Remember, driving down the interstate, that's like experiencing a small hurricane if you are a plant. So it's rough. But that's what you'll see. That is not the way the palm should be maintained in the future. Keep that in mind. Talk about pruning in a little while. But that rooting depth, where that existing root system is now, needs to still be very close to the surface. So what we see, unfortunately, is people will bury them very deep because they don't want to have to stake it and it might blow over. And they miss the root initiation zone, and so it fails to root. So you still want to, just like any other containerized or woody plant, you want to plant it at the depth that it was growing initially. That may require staking. Banding of palm trees is a special procedure because you are not going to be able to penetrate that pseudo bark and keep it up. So we can certainly provide you information on how to properly band it, but you will cover that trunk and put pieces of wood onto that covering, whether it's burlap or cloth, and then support those in 3 different directions. It may need to stay up for a year. Here's the downfall. When we talk about every other woody plant on the that would move in Florida, we talk about plant in the fall, plant in the winter. That's when the roots are the most active. No, palms did not get that memo. They will not root without warm soil. So April to August is your best transplant time. It makes it hard for folks when they're trying to put a whole landscape together at one time. Can you plant it in November, December? Absolutely. But it will not be forming roots for months. So if you want it to take hold very quickly, make sure that soil's warmed up. Treat it, remember, it's a grass. Has the grass greened up? If the grass greens up, my palm will root.
All right, well, thank you, Sheila. You kind of stole some of the Ray's thunder there. I was going to
Oh, I'm
ask him
sorry.
if there's a. You're fine. No,
No,
you're
no,
fine.
no,
You
no.
provided a really good explanation. But Ray, Sheila touched upon the best time to plant. So maybe not the fall like the rest of our trees. Any other kind of soil preparation kind of advice you'd want to give the folks that are just planting trees in the ground
Yeah, I'll
or
just kind of
palms? We'll say palms
yeah,
in the ground, not trees.
I'll kind of, yeah, definitely. I'll kind of add a little bit to Sheila's point there. Yeah, you want to plant during the rainy season. The rainy, warm season is great. Typically, like Sheila was talking about, April through August is great. We get the bulk of our rain here in my area, the Panhandle, from July to September, probably. So that's a good time to plant. The main thing too, you don't want to go through periods of where it's going to dry out. You want to keep that in the back of your mind that we go through these drought periods, which we could, you definitely want to make sure you water weekly. And you want to plant as soon as possible too. With these container palms, you don't know how long, a lot of times they've been in a container and they may be somewhat root bound. So you definitely want to, you want to plant as soon as possible. But to your point there, Mark, yeah, with soil prep, be careful with like selecting areas where the water table is kind of high, or there's just like poor drainage in areas where you'd like to put some palms, because that can be an issue. Palms don't like wet feet, constantly have wet feet. So sites that have those kind of characteristics, you probably don't want to use unless you're able to kind of make berms or kind of build up areas where you can plant, in kind of a mounded sort of setting. Be wary of soils that are very, clay hard pan, more clay-y soils that hold moisture at a depth of the root zone. that can cause some problems too. If you have an area like that, you can kind of punch holes around the area to help sort of dry out the soil, but it's still going to be an uphill battle to put a palm in that issue. As far as planting though and soil prep, you definitely want to plant you want to dig a hole about twice the size of the diameter of the root system. Think about, kind of popcorn bowl shaped hole as well, and backfill those areas. A little bit about backfill. I think a lot of people think, well, I'll go and I'll put some really good grade mushroom compost or some sort of compost as a backfill. Through UF studies, there's no evidence that's really shown that that's been, beneficial. It's not like you can't do that, but the native soil that you have on the property right there is just fine to use for your backfill. And once you get the palm planted, just like Sheila was talking about, referencing there, is that you want to make sure the palm is at grade, at the same grade level as the land there. And you want to make sure you wash the soil down pretty good around the palm soon after you plant, just to eliminate any kind of air pockets that you might have. I see this sometimes, and I've done this with some palms too, where you can build a little berm around the outside, the perimeter of the palm. Just a small, shallow berm. It gives you a good, especially early on with that palm, as far as root establishment, it gives it a nice little pocket area to hold that irrigation water in. So that's just another thing you can do when you're planting palms.
Yeah, with
I think
irrigation, if you've got that option to put an individual bubbler on it, that will certainly help instead of relying on any sort of spray head to do it.
okay, we're gonna come back to you a little bit later for drip irrigation, Sheila. So hold that thought.
Okay.
Beth, coming to you. So we picked their pond, we got it planted. Tell us a little bit about fertilization. What kind of fertilizing should folks be thinking about for their special palm tree they just got in the ground?
Yeah, this is probably the hardest part for us, is knowing how to fertilize a palm correctly. Most of the fertilizers you're going to buy for other plants for your lawn are absolutely not suited for palms. Our soils are very sandy. These palms are growing very quickly since they're grasses, and they're going to need a lot of nutrients. We need all of those nutrients to be 100% slow release. We don't need one nutrient to be slow release, another to be quick release. We are going to induce nutrient deficiencies. And that's the most common problem with a lot of our palms, are just nutrient problems. So you want to buy a fertilizer. For example, the common one is an 8-0-12-4, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium. They also sell one with some phosphorus if you need it, but that's a palm fertilizer. The nitrogen is sulfur coated or polymer coated. The potassium is coated, so they're both slow release, slowly available. You have a magnesium source that's called kieserite. That's a special slow release magnesium source. You also have iron that is called a chelated iron, and that's just an available iron once it hits the soil. Most of our iron, as soon as it hits the soil, becomes immediately non-available to a plant. And so you're going to pay some money for that fertilizer. But if you want a palm, budget for fertilizer, because you absolutely need the correct form. It is better to not fertilize at all than to use the wrong product. So lawn fertilizers do not mix with palm trees. You will actually cause deficiencies by using those. You're going to put on quite a bit. You're going to probably fertilize 2 to 3 times up here in North Florida, maybe March, April, then in June, and then maybe again in September. And you're going to use quite a bit. The rate is 1.5 pounds of actual fertilizer for every 100 square feet. And you're going to broadcast this around. We don't do spikes. We don't do put it in holes. We broadcast it because that is a mat of dense root system. So make sure if you need it, we have the fertilizer to buy. Locally, we can tell you where that's found, or you can order that online.
Thank you very much, Beth. That was very good. Let's see, Sheila. This kind of gets into, I think, nutrition as well, right? When we're talking about pruning fronds, but a lot of people, they want to know, uh, can I take off those dead boots, right? Should those be pruned off? And maybe also touch a little bit on this idea of like hurricane pruning, right? So when we're talking about pruning palms, um, let us know what we can do with the boots and how does hurricane pruning maybe affect the nutrition of the palm?
All right. Um, the boots and most of the species that you're talking about with the heavy boots are our cabbage palms. It is their individual genetics. So when they will fall off is preset. You don't know. Many times people want that clear trunk and they will take a machete and actually cut them off of there. You take a good chance of wounding the trunk doing so. So ideally leave the split portion of that leaf petiole, which is what we call the boot or the boot jack, on it and let it fall off on its own. Once they get loose, if they're a flight hazard, during a storm event, yeah, go ahead and pull on it if it comes off. That's not a problem. You might see ferns grow in there. That's not a problem. Okay. But when you prune, you want to only remove the fronds that have turned completely brown on their own. Now, if you have excessive browning, half of my crown is brown, let's start talking about disease issues, okay? That is not normal aging. It should be a quarter of the fronds at the bottom, the ones closest to the ground, and they will age on their own as the new leaves come out at the top. They will fall off on their own, but I know you got an HOA, oh, we got to have all those cleaned up. So you will have people coming through and cutting fronds off. Completely brown, no problem. But then they get carried away and start pruning up higher and higher. Think about the crown of a palm tree as a clock face. Where 12, 6, 3, 9 are. You can prune up to 3 and 9 without negatively impacting the health of the frond. Because those nutrients that Beth told you to spread on the ground, they have been moved up to the older fronds, and then the leaf spear, the new ones coming out, will rob the nutrients from those old leaves, move it to the new leaves as they develop. That's how they're aging on their own. But if you start cutting green ones, you now have eliminated those nutrients from making it to the leaf spear. So that's, if you have to, cutting at the 9 and 3 position will not be taking away too many nutrients. But then we have the folks that move on to 10 and 2, 11 and 1. I hate to say the straight up 12 o'clock. That's hurricane pruning. It was believed, because that's the way my palm tree came in on the truck, right? When the winds start blowing really strong, I have to take all those fronds off to save that leaf spear. That's just the opposite. Those fronds are protecting that leaf spear. You do not want to remove them. So the old, thought of hurricane pruning will protect does not. And what you will see, if you've watched one over time, you will see that the trunk itself gets narrower and narrower as those fronds are taking off, because the palm at that stage was starving. And that's where those leaves were attached. So no, we don't want to do any hurricane pruning. 9 and 3, stop there. If you can leave it even lower than that and just take the brown ones, fantastic. I know we get the phone calls, but it's up against the wall. Just because you cut the fronds on the backside touching the wall does not mean you have to come all the way around the front and make it an even circle. No, just take the ones off the back. Leave the front intact, okay?
When people ask about hurricane pruning, I try to remind them where palms are adapted to, right? So where do palms naturally come from? Sheila, Ray, Beth, will you tell us?
Predominantly the Caribbean for many of them that we see here. Others are from the desert Arab region or from islands off of Africa and South America.
So a lot
Do
of our
they
palms
get
are
any
used to
strong
seeing
winds?
hurricanes. Yeah.
Absolutely. They are already adapted for hurricanes and strong winds.
Ray mentioned the Chinese fan. So you want to mention, no one asked this question, so I'm throwing this in there randomly, but part of you want to mention pruning of a Chinese fan because any of you, because that's part of the
Be very,
special part of a Chinese fan, right?
yeah, be very careful.
Yeah, and be very
Protect the
careful too.
skin, yes.
And oftentimes some of these, right, that skirt that those dead fronds create is part of the look of the palm tree as well, right? So you don't
Yeah,
always want.
in Washingtonians, if you
Mhm.
can leave the skirt, because they are the last ones to drop their fronds. If you can leave all those fronds laying there, you have now also provided solo bat habitat. And we forget about those things. Those that don't live in colonies and caves and places, they have to go somewhere. And under palm fronds is one of their absolute favorites.
Ooh,
It is
that
kind
might
of
not help people keep their palm fronds around, Sheila, but save the bats. Think of the bats, yo.
save the bats, but otherwise, yeah, that is, that skirt hanging there is protecting that trunk from other damage that might hit it. And like you said, on the Chinese fan, it's already a recurved frond, and that's kind of the umbrella look that you want.
Mhm.
So again, just the brown ones.
All
Don't
right.
try
Well,
to turn that thing into an upright fan. No.
thank you very much, Sheila. Let's see. Well, we covered pruning that European fan. Sheila, let's go back to you. You had mentioned drip irrigation. Do you think that is the best way to get let's say maybe after establishment, right? To keep the palm well irrigated, make sure it's looking good. Is drip irrigation the best way to go?
After establishment, no irrigation.
Ah, even better. Thank you,
Even
Sheila.
better yet, it's the establishment period that we worry about. So unfortunately, spray heads, which are meant for most of your planting bed areas, aren't able to be directed to just that one small root ball, where if you do a retrofit kit, where you unscrew one of the heads and you put a bubbler onto it so that that individual palm is able to receive water in that little donut sort of shape, that little well that Ray was talking about. The problem is I don't want it only on one side, so I want this bubbler on a stick. And I can pull it up and I can move it to the other side and rotate it around so that the entire root ball will get wet. But that is the best way to get it established, unless you're just willing to do the hand watering. It's not that long standing there with a hose. I mean, enjoy the outside for 10 minutes while you're watering it thoroughly all the way around. But
And for most
as
palms, you think
mentioned,
after establishment, just let it go, huh?
let it go. If we go through 6, 8, 10 weeks with absolutely no rain, if there's a spray head in that bed anywhere that's going to hit the other plants, you're good. It'll make it. It doesn't need supplemental watering. Remember, most of
Okay.
these are from really dry areas and they don't like wet feet anyway.
Okay.
Overwatering is a much bigger problem than underwatering them.
All right, thank you. Now I'm going to ask, I think Sheila and Beth are going to cover my next question here. And this is, are there any diseases that we need to be worried about in our palm trees? Beth,
I've
you want to
talked
start
a
off?
lot. You want one, or I can start since my
Take
mic's
a little
on.
break, Sheila. Let Beth answer it
Yeah,
first.
Okay, so
lots and lots of diseases.
yeah, we're not going to cover many. I'm going to mention one called Phthaliopsis trunk rot. We've seen this a little bit, and the thing about a palm, like Sheila mentioned, we don't want to wound that trunk. When she was mentioning staking that palm, it used to be people would nail into the palm itself to hold those stakes on. There is now a very specified technique to ban them so you're not injuring that trunk. We used to also spike trunks to climb them to prune them. That's an open wound. But naturally, some palms are going to have an open wound. When we have storms around, things could hit it, cracks could happen. And we have a fungus that will land on that and grow in the palm, and it causes a decay of that really strong fiber within the tree. And you'll actually have a weeping on the outside of the trunk that has an odor associated with it. It's very sour, but it looks like you just have this slime goo on your trunk, and the inside of that trunk is rotting, and it's really a hazard for falling. Because think about where the palm is. It's by your house, it's by a driveway, it's in a condo, it's out in a commercial site. And the weight of that top above where the injury happens makes it a huge risk factor for people. There's really not a whole lot you can do other than trying to prevent any wounding on that trunk by your practices as best you can. So good care when the company is installing it, when you're moving around that, trimming or whatever you're doing, clean cuts when pruning, cleaning your equipment, things like that. Just do the best you can to eliminate those wounds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's for that trunk rot. And Sheila, any other we want to cover?
How about butt rot instead of trunk rot? The butt of a palm tree is where the stem meets the root system, by the way. Ganoderma butt rot. Again, this is something that can get into it and cause the decay, but now it's the connection between the trunk and the root system. And now the whole thing will come over. It doesn't just break where the wounding had occurred. Unfortunately, this again is a naturally occurring fungus. It's out there, but you do get a little warning. You will first see something, usually not much over head high, that looks like they took white Play-Doh or silly putty and slapped it on the side of your tree. Your tree. No, your palm. I'm sorry, I said tree.
I know,
Your palm.
it's tricky.
And over time, that's the initial flowering stage of this fungus. And over time, that will start to flatten out and form a brown conch, a little shelf. That is an indication now that it is very advanced because the fungus is sporulating. It's sending out new spores, hoping to have lots more. We've seen it many times. The top of the palm looks perfectly fine. Along comes the wind and it blows the whole thing over. But they've been seeing those conchs for months and just knocking them off. All right. This is a soil-borne problem at that stage. You must remove that palm and you cannot plant a palm there ever again.
That's
It
sad.
is a big issue. Fusarium wilt, another issue we're dealing with. You know, it's all about the pruning. As Beth mentioned, when you are pruning suspicious looking fronds, hey, I got some extra brown and don't know what's going on. Please make sure to sanitize your pruning saw, your clippers, you know, the piece of equipment that you're using, because those can be the contamination source for the next palm that you touch. 10% bleach solution, alcohol solutions, alcohol wipes, any more, a can of Lysol will do the job, but clean it up. And with the Phoenix species, it's been such a big problem that many folks have gone to assigning just a pruning saw for that particular palm because they don't want to spread it. But the Fusarium wilt, you will see those browning fronds, but as they move into the green ones, half of the frond is brown, half of the frond is green. That's a huge warning signal right there. And we can certainly, you know, submit those for positive identification of that pathogen. But again, another one that's going to contaminate the soil. No palms ever go back in there again. So keep
They'll
an
have to
eye
plant.
open for those too, because you're going to have to go to a different plant now or
They'll have to plant
realize,
an actual tree.
yeah, if you insist on a palm, just expect it to happen again. Yeah.
All right, thanks, folks. Let's see. The Beth talked about this a little bit with the nutrients, right, and fertilization. And if you use regular old fertilizer, it's not going to look. There's, oftentimes some of these things that look like diseases in your palms, what you might have is a soil nutrient deficiency. So, that's where your extension folks come in to help. And so if you got questions about those palms, just call your county agent and they will happily help you out. Ray, I'm coming to you. I haven't heard your voice in a while, so I want to ask you, we're going to start asking some questions about individual palm species at this point. And we had someone want to know, how do you know if that little thing popping up in the yard, is that a cabbage palm or is it a saw palmetto? Tell us, what do you do, wizard? How do you know, Ray?
Exactly, and that can be confusing. Before cabbage palm sends up its trunk, it looks a lot like a saw palmetto. And this is a really great master gardener kind of exercise to do with your volunteers. You know, we've done a field trip on this where we've actually gone out to a county park and kind of done like a outdoor lab on how to ID the whether it's a cabbage palm or if it's a palmetto. But there are three areas that you can kind of look for on the plant that will help tell you differentiate between the two. As far as the cabbage palm goes, the stalk is gonna, join the leaf at the stem, at the petiole, and it's gonna run through the middle of the blade. And it's gonna end up giving it kind of a droopy sort of look of the frond, and you're gonna see a lot of these very visible kind of fibers coming off the leaf too. A saw palmetto doesn't exactly do like that, set like that, and it's more, a saw palmetto leaf is more kind of rounded. It's more erect too. It's got a little bit more structure to it that way, with its appearance, and it's not going to have any of those little fibers coming off the leaf. So that's one way you can tell, is by looking at the frond that way. A little bit closer, if you look at the stem of the frond, the cabbage palm is going to be long and it's going to be kind of stiff and very strong, and it's not going to have any teeth, any jagged teeth on it, where the sow palmetto is going to have a little short stem, and it's going to have these little small little curved teeth that are kind of built into the stem there. And one more way to tell, that'll help to differentiate, is the fruiting bodies themselves. Now, the cabbage palm is going to have, the fruiting bodies are going to be pretty small. They're only going to be about maybe a ½ inch long. They're going to be very rounded. They'll be kind of a bright, when they're very juvenile, they're going to be very bright, kind of lime greenish looking. And then as they mature, they'll be very black, very, very, very dark. Where the saw palmetto, they're more kind of oblong shaped, more kind of egg shaped. They'll be a little bit longer too. They'll probably be about an inch long. And they'll be more of kind of a golden kind of green color. And they'll eventually fade to kind of a bluish, blackish color at maturity. So those are kind of the three areas that you can look at as far as plant structure goes to differentiate between whether it's a cabbage palm or whether it's a saw palmetto.
Great, I love it. They got to get their observation skills honed in, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I often talk. I think we get this question from our master gardeners, and I always explain that that little cabbage palms get this little, I call it a hair lick or a cow lick, right? They get this weird
Yeah.
little bend in the frond that
Kind of
makes it
droop.
kind of
Yeah,
force
droop
it
over.
down. All right, let's see. Back to you, Sheila. You got a break from talking?
Sure.
You good? All right. Tell us what are the tips? How do I grow date palms for fruit in North Florida?
Well, that fruit that you see in the grocery store, those date palms, okay, those are from those juvenile Phoenix, and usually Phoenix dactyliphora. The ones medjool, man, those are the really good
So
fruit.
tasty. Yeah.
So tasty, right? Well, if you bring your Phoenix Dac in as a juvenile, then yes, you've got a pretty good chance that she will be able to produce some fruit. It's going to be very large fruit, and it does require special pollination. So here's our problem. You have to leave all those flower stalks hanging out there and hope that you get enough insect pollination. Otherwise, crawling up there to pollinate it yourself is going to be a huge challenge. And most of what is brought in as an ornamental tree are those that are past their peak fruiting. That's why they're being used as ornamentals. They are left over from the date industry. So they are trying to choose the ones that are not good producers anyway. It's a huge challenge for you. You may not ever be able to get fruit here just because of that without growing your own little one. And that's going to take a good decade.
So
So
we still might just want to go buy them at the store.
buy them at the store, yeah. But if you
Okay.
happen to come across one that's dropping fruit, because we get that every once in a while, fantastic. But it's not the most common.
Dates are so yummy though, aren't they?
Yeah,
They'll have to grow pindo palms instead, I guess, and just manage with that.
and make some
Uh,
jellies. Yeah, it's not the
yeah,
same. Yeah,
not quite the same. Yeah,
those dates are really good, but most of what is brought to us is not here for growing the
fruit
fruit.
production.
It's for ornamental. Yeah.
All right, Beth, coming to you, and Sheila touched on this a bit, but we had someone write in that how much they love their sable palm. The reason they love it so much, it's the only tree that survived Hurricane Michael. So I'm sure that that tree provided them lots of comfort, right, when nothing else was around. But the boot jacks are full of ferns. Is that okay? Do we need to worry about all these other plants growing on, off of the palm tree?
Yeah, I totally agree with Sheila. There's really nothing to worry about. Those boots are going to be good collection spots for just a little bit of soil in there. And the fern has a nice stem, a rhizome, and they're just going to kind of hold in place. They're not burrowing into the tree. They're not a parasite in any way. So they're just kind of a decoration while those boots are there. So just enjoy them.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to see come out is Silotum nudum. Y'all know Silotum nudum, right? The old whisk fern. It's a very cool one that you sometimes will find growing out of these little boots. Okay, wait, there was one on Pindo that I wanted to ask Sheila. Well, let's see. Sheila kind of already touched on this. The question was how much moisture is too much for a Pindo? So go ahead, answer that one for us again, Sheila. You kind of touched on it already, but how much is too much water?
Never ever have any water that stays on the surface. Go out there with a rain event. If it's still there 20 minutes after the rain quits, you got a drainage problem there.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, you never want the cabbage palm, the sable will take the most wet feet. That's where they're from is some of the swampier land down south, but no, we never want water to ever collect on it. So if you're doing supplemental irrigation, if your system is hitting that 2 or 3 times a week, you probably have too much water on it. Once a
Okay,
week is
go.
plenty. It could go 2 weeks once it's established. Yeah,
All
get the
right.
water diverted. You will actually see irrigation shields that you can put up in front of your irrigation head so that it never hits that palm tree.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you, Sheila. Save some water, everyone. Don't and
Save the
leave your
water.
palm alone.
Yeah, that pindo palm, I mean, it's coming from an island off of South America. They don't get a lot of rain. It is not a problem. They do not need it.
All right. Let's see. We're going to talk about some of these plants that people throw in with palms, right? So, Master Gardener volunteers in the little chat or whoever's out there listening, let us know what are some of these plants that you think commonly get confused with palms. It has to do with their common names, but they're not actually palms. And while you guys stick some of those in the comment, I'm going to think of which person I want to ask for first. And I'm going to go to Beth. And Beth, tell us about, did anyone answer yet? I don't see it there, but I'll start with one, the Kunti palm, right? So explain to us, first of all, why a Kunti palm isn't truly a palm, and then give us some tips on how we might take care of Kunti palm in the landscape.
Yeah, these kind of some of these palms, someone mentioned the sago palm or the
That's the other
kunti
one. Good
palm.
job, Melissa.
It's just kind of like bulbs. We call a lot of things bulbs that are not truly bulbs. And we call a lot of things palms that are not truly palms. Those are going to be more related to your pine tree. It's a cone-bearing plant. And if you ever look at the reproductive structure of a sago, you have on a male, a nice cone that comes up, lots of pollen that's going to move in the wind, and that's going to fertilize the female, and you have those big red open seeds that you see around the sago. And if you look closely on a kunti, if you have both male and female, you'll see the same thing. So they don't, it's not like a flowering plant. It's not going to be like the palm, the grass. it's going to be a whole different called gymnosperms. So think of it more related to your pine trees. But they're wonderful plants. They have terrific look. We love coontie, and it's becoming really more in favor recently as a good native plant in Florida because it's adapted, it's low maintenance, it doesn't take a lot of care once it's established, it's got a good tuber root system on it, and it's low growing. You know, we're not looking for something that's going to get too tall. But someone asked, will it grow down in the coastal areas? It will grow in the coastal areas. It's going to be moderately salt tolerant. Down in those areas, it's going to be drought tolerant as well, grows in sun or part shade. So if you can, if it's safe for you to use a coontie, the precaution would be around small children if it's in seed, or around some animals if they tend to eat seeds. Those can be toxic. So just be aware of that. But it's a great native plant to use.
Did you guys see recently Coontie palm made it into the national news a little bit because they were talking up the Atala, the blue Atala, something like that butterfly. It's a butterfly that almost went extinct. The Coontie is its larval host plant, and because Coontie has been so popular in landscaping, this Atala butterfly is on the rebound and it's actually spreading north with the use of Coontie in landscaping. So a pretty cool story. It made national news a while back. Mr. Roger Hammer, famous botanist down South Florida, was talking up Coontie palms. Sheila, coming back to you, and we're going to talk about that other plant that's often called the palm tree, but not truly a palm, the sago palm. And tell us, one of the questions is, what's the best way to separate those little pups that come off the main plant?
All right. And yes, we refer to these two that are actually in that cycad group as palms. So remember, you do not have to treat either one of these with that palm fertilizer. They have totally different nutritional needs. So save that palm fertilizer for, your true palms. But the sago palm, as we call it, it's a true, actually sago is enough. We need to stop there, just like palm tree. We got to stop without
I
the
know
tree.
it's all sorts of messed up. Trees aren't even a palm. Sago's not a palm. Oh my goodness.
So that sago will tend to be a singular trunk as it grows over time. Should the bud ever get wounded, it may branch out. And so sometimes when people are taking out the reproductive parts, the female or the male part, they wound that growth point and it branches out. So then we start seeing sagos with many, many stems on them. As it gets older, it will go ahead and send out vegetative new little bulbs, as Beth was talking about bulbs. That's what they'll look like. It's at the beginning is there's these little bitty fronds coming up at the base of the trunk of my sago. And then shortly after that, underground, it will form a kind of a bulb-like structure to it. You can simply separate those with a sharp device. Again, let's not try to wound the trunk. So a sharp shovel, a very sharp knife. If you do the machete, make sure that you've got a good swing. Don't hit that trunk again. Just literally separate it from the mother plant once you've got about 4 to 6 leaves on that little pup. If you do it too early, you won't have enough of that underground stem development for it to take. You do want a little of that. And so when you go to cut it, you'll end up with just leaves. Let it grow out a few leaves. Half a dozen leaves is good, and you'll have enough stem structure to be able to transplant it. And then you can put it in the ground or into a container and then wait and wait and wait. 6 months to a year to root. It's not going to be instantaneous, guys, before you see new growth. So have some patience. And again, only while it's warm. If you want it to go ahead and root quickly, make sure you're doing it over those late spring to early fall months. Doing it this in the middle of the winter, you're just not going to get it to root. It'll be even slower. But it's
I
pretty
guess I'll
simple, easy
I
to
guess
do.
I'll mention, just like Beth mentioned with the Coontie, be careful with the sago palm, especially the fruiting, the females. These are both dioecious, right? They're divorced. So there's separate male and female plants. So the female sago, those fruits, very toxic for pets. So please be careful around your pets.
As is the
Uh,
foliage though too, but that seed is really bad.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, the kids that might tend to pick them up, even playing with them, throwing them at each other, and then end up getting it under their fingernails, that can be a problem, and then they go sticking their fingers in their mouth. So yeah, definitely not. And if you want to grow a sago from seed, you got to wait for that whole head to open up and all those seeds to be there. Then you're going to have to go through the removal of the seed coat. The patience for rooting the pup is pretty good. Growing it from seed, add another year on that. Okay. Lots of time, but it can be done if you wait for that whole process to finish, but not something I'd want to do if I did have domestic pets or kids that got into it.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories recently, or my questions recently, was like, "What's wrong with my sago?" And I said, "Oh, congratulations, she's pregnant, right?" Because that weird fruiting structure was starting to
The
form, and
fuzzy
they thought they had a
basketball, yeah.
major problem. Yeah. All right, we're getting towards the end here. I want to ask Ray. Ray, is there one site with UF extension that would help people out on the different kinds of palms and how do I D some of these palms? Is there like one kind of place you would send folks?
Absolutely. There's a great website to use. It's one of our EDIS websites, and that stands for Electronic Document Information System. So there's a great, yeah, there. Thank you, Julie, for putting the link there in the chat. That's a great resource to go to. They kind of have a narrowed down list on there where there's documents on care, diseases, nutrition and fertilizing, even like pest management, and really some overall management strategies. There's some detailed information about the individual varieties that can be grown in Florida. You'll notice on there's a couple of larger documents that are one's ornamental palms of Central Florida and one's ornamental palms of South Florida, because there's such a long list of palms that can be grown in those regions. But no such one for our northern part of Florida because it's such a smaller list. But that's a really good
Because like Beth
resource.
told us, they'll just die.
Yeah, if I can add to that,
exactly,
Ray,
exactly.
if you pull up the Central Florida list though, the table is in there with all of them and the zone is on it. So stick
That's a
to
great point.
those zone 8 ones. Unless you're along the coast, you might get away with some of the 9s, but that Central Florida list, beautiful pictures and the chart telling you what zones you can grow them in. We can certainly use that for North Florida.
All
And
right, thank you,
also,
folks. Go ahead.
okay, I was
Oh,
just going to
go
say,
ahead, Ray.
also in the Florida Friendly Guide here, in the palm section, there are regions too that are denoted for the individual palms, and you'll see where it denotes northern region for palms too. So you can also find that in there as well.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. We did have one question come in, so real quick, saying that they've seen their neighbors, kind of put a raised bed almost around the palm, and then they're filling it with soil. So what would you all say? Is this a good idea or a bad idea? Sheila? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say Beth's got her thumb going now.
Yeah.
Now, just like a woody tree, you would never pile any soil up the trunk of it. You may get lucky that you're still in the root initiation zone and it'll send out a secondary root system, but more than likely what you're going to do is increase the possibility of having some stem rot. That trunk will decay on you very, very quickly because that soil is sitting up against it and keeping moisture. So no, sorry.
Okay.
6
Go tell your
inches,
neighbor,
8
go tell your neighbors
inches.
in a nice way
Yeah,
that that's not the right method, right practice
no,
there.
no,
All right, well, it's
sorry.
2 o'clock. We just hit 2 o'clock. We thank everyone for being with us today. You will get an automated link to take a survey to let us know if you learned anything, if you enjoyed it. Please fill out the survey for us. We love surveys here. It's how we prove to folks that we're, changing the world. So please fill out those surveys and then be on the lookout for our next session. Gardening the Panhandle Live will be April 11th, and we're going to be talking fruit trees for Northwest Florida. And I think we go back to Daniel being the MC. I'm not sure. I might still be it. I can't remember. But again, we thank you all for being with us today. Thank you for our amazing panelists, Sheila, Ray, and Beth. Appreciate it. And thank you for Julie and everyone else in the background. Matt Lawler's back there, I think, taking care of using the chat and putting up these references. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And remember, go tell people that sagos and Kunti palms, not actually palms, palms, not actually trees. Look at that. Lots of information. Bye, agents. See you later.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody.